Today we're comparing two upscaling technologies from Nvidia DLSS and Nvidia Image Scaling, or NIS for short. So why are there two upscaling technologies from Nvidia? What's the difference? Well, in a nutshell, Nvidia Image Scaling works at the driver level and is a spatial upscaler that upscales entire frames after they've been rendered by the GPU. DLSS, on the other hand, is integrated directly within the game engine, which gives game developers more control, and it uses Nvidia's latest and greatest AI goodness. So then, case closed, use the better one, DLSS, right? Well, not so fast, because as always with this stuff, it depends, and the devil is in the detail, and we need to go testing. We're going to be testing with my Nvidia 4080 Super today using my 4K TV that I use for simming, and we're also going to be testing in VR thanks to Pimax for lending us their Crystal Light and Crystal Super headsets and for sponsoring this video, and for recently integrating Nvidia's image scaling into their Pimax Play app, therefore making this upscaling technology available to all games when using VR. If you're in the market for anything Pimax, my affiliate link is down below, and using the code AIRNOT at checkout can get you 3% off the upfront cost of a headset. And if you've been on the fence about a Pimax Crystal Light, if you're on the ball and you purchase between 5 and 11 PM UTC on August 24th, 2025, using the link in the description and the code AIRNOT10 at checkout can get you a 10% discount off of the upfront cost of a Pimax Crystal Light headset. Right, on to the testing. Okay, so we're at Bristol Airport from Pilot Plus in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 in the Phoenix A319 BFU, rocking the updated 2024 AirNot livery. Doesn't she look wonderful? You can download the liveries for yourself at airnot.co.uk/liveries, and if you're interested, you can even join the AirNot virtual airline over on New Sky. I'll leave links in the description. Anyway, we're starting out on my 4K TV running my 4080 Super with my ultra-ish graphic settings. I'll roll them across the screen now. The rest of my system is an AMD 9800X 3D CPU with 64 gigs of DDR5 6000 CL13 memory. Live weather is off, and we're running with the Few Clouds weather preset. At 4K using TAA with no frame generation or DLSS, we're getting around about 40 FPS in what seems to be a fairly well balanced situation. Looking at the time it takes my GPU to render a frame, it's around about 21, 22 milliseconds, and then the time it takes my CPU to do its part is around 23 milliseconds, so not much between them, so we're nice and balanced, or so I thought. Enabling DLSS in quality mode dropped my CPU time from the 23-ish milliseconds down to around 17, therefore increasing our frame rate from 40-ish somewhere up into the mid-50s as we sit here on the ground at Bristol. Things got even better once we took off and we were clear of the runway, getting up into the 60s, even the 70s, which is really, really nice. Now, how come we've become less CPU bottlenecked by enabling DLSS? Surely, if the CPU is bottlenecked at 4K, it will still be bottlenecked with DLSS. Well, not entirely, as DLSS renders the game on the GPU at a lower resolution, then uses AI to upscale it. The CPU doesn't have to work as hard to feed the GPU at a lower pre-upscaling resolution when compared to running natively at 4K. Other benefits of DLSS in quality mode is a slightly lower VRAM usage. We're not talking about a ton here, maybe around 400 megabytes as we sit here on the ground, but it's all very, very welcome indeed. Visually, I really quite like DLSS sitting here on the ground. I'm struggling to see any real drawbacks of using it, though it's when you start flying that the drawback becomes apparent, and that is the glass cockpit displays. Look here as we start to climb out of the airport and our altitude tape starts to move. It's a big blurry mess. There was a glimmer of hope that DLSS 4 might resolve this as it promised higher detail in motion, but it seems it wasn't to be. This is for me why when I'm using my TV to do simming, I tend to stay away from DLSS. Moving into performance mode on DLSS only makes the visuals worse while offering not a huge amount of FPS gains. You can see here the CPU time is kicking around the 17 millisecond mark as it was in quality mode. So while the GPU is now at 13 milliseconds, we're still limited by the CPU at the same frame rate we saw while running DLSS in quality mode. So perhaps now we actually are CPU limited. So then what about Nvidia's image scaling? Due to it having a lighter touch compared to DLSS's heavy-handed AI approach, could it yield better performance without compromising too much on the visuals, I wonder? First things first then, let me just say that this was a complete nightmare to figure out. I thought I was going mad. I was Googling around for solutions, and everywhere I went, I found inconclusive forum posts. But after about an hour and a half of questioning my life choices, I did finally get there, and in hindsight, it seems so obvious now. Anyway, I'll save you the pain and quickly show you what I did. Firstly, in the Nvidia app, go to Graphics, then Global Settings, and it's here that you can enable the image scaling. And you can then choose a render resolution and the sharpness that you'd like. So naively, I thought I would just do that, load up the sim and go for it. But in the top left, I could see there was NIS in blue, which means that the sharpening is working. And I could notice that, but the upscaling was not working. I tried lowering the resolution within the sim to trigger it into life, and nothing. It wasn't until I lowered my TV's resolution from 4K to 1440p in the Windows display settings that NIS turned green, indicating that we were cooking. So I don't even know if the render resolution thing in the Nvidia app is doing anything at all, given that it took me going into Windows display settings to make it come to life. Anyway, with Windows set to 1440p and the sim set to 1440p, and Nvidia Image Scaling is now upscaling us to 4K and showing in green, so we know it's all working, it was actually making a pretty decent job of it visually. On the ground, we're getting around 66 FPS, which is more than the high to mid 50s we saw with DLSS, presumably, again, due to Nvidia Image Scaling having a lighter footprint, and therefore it puts less load on the system. The VRAM is nice and low, again, kind of around 8.2 gig. This is all looking good. Visually, it looks maybe a touch more prickly around the edges, but it's really quite good, all things considered. I think I'd be willing to overlook it, especially when it comes to this. Look at this. No ghosting on the glass cockpit displays. And you can see here we're up into the 70s once we're airborne. This is really cool. One thing to keep in mind is that as this is a driver level solution, it's going to apply to all games, not just Microsoft Flight Simulator. So if there's a title you want to use DLSS with, you'll have to make sure you're disabling NIS before you play it. I absolutely love the lack of smeariness on the glass cockpit displays though. In an ideal world, Asobo would update the sim to allow plane developers to exclude the glass cockpit displays from the DLSS rendering pipeline. It is possible. That's one of the benefits of DLSS. As it runs in the game engine, things can be excluded. For example, maybe if you're playing a racing game, you might exclude the speedometer or maybe the pause menu assets, for example. I really wish Asobo would do this. I think it was spoken about a while ago, but it never really materialized. If they did this, I think I would recommend and use DLSS in a heartbeat, but the smeary glass cockpit displays are what holds me back, which therefore makes Nvidia's image scaling a really intriguing option. No ghosting, and the FPS numbers were really good. But yeah, a little bit prickly around the edges compared to what we've become accustomed to with DLSS. I'd love to hear how you'll find it, because this stuff is very subjective. And with that, let's move on to VR. We're using the Pimax Crystal Super, the latest and greatest from Pimax. We reviewed it on the channel quite recently, and I was very impressed by its feature set, but it was quite clear that it puts a lot of load on your GPU, as each eye has more pixels than a 4K TV. That's a lot. So let's get testing. Before we do though, I'm trying something a bit different to capture today's footage from the VR headset. Instead of using OBS to capture it, I'm filming through the lens of the headset, mostly because I'm having issues with OBS and it's lagging like crazy when I try to record the Crystal Super. I'm not sure why, but probably likely due to the massive resolution at play. But anyway, starting out with no assistance from DLSS or Nvidia Image Scaling, you can see we're in a bit of a pickle on the ground here, getting only around 30 FPS depending on where you look. It did seem to struggle more when I looked over to the terminal building, which makes sense. This is just with us running at TAA with 80% render resolution with dynamic foveated rendering enabled. That's one of the Crystal Super's party tricks, in that it renders in high resolution only the area of the frame where you're actually looking. Very clever, and it helps a ton. We'd likely be in the high teens, low 20s without it. I did also notice the sim could fall into that trap where it gets a bit laggy, especially when you first boot into the sim and you sort of have to wait for it to recover. I'm suspecting this is because the VRAM is running a bit tight. Let's try DLSS. Now, DLSS for VR has been integrated into Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 for a while now, so this isn't exactly new, but we'll run it anyway to get some data, and you can see on the ground in quality mode, we're getting around about 35 FPS, which isn't exactly a huge increase over not using DLSS at all. We are also still running dynamic foveated rendering alongside DLSS. Perhaps then, even with DLSS in quality mode, the Pimax Crystal Super's enormous pixel count is still a bit much. But what if we were to go to the other end of the scale to DLSS performance mode, and you can see a slight improvement around 40-ish FPS, but again, it's not like we're making leaps and bounds here, and DLSS in performance mode isn't the greatest in my opinion. I would much rather be running at quality, maybe balanced at a push. As discussed, whatever quality setting you use, you're going to be having some issues with smeary glass cockpit displays if you're in an airliner like an Airbus or a Boeing. And as you can see as we run the sim with DLSS in quality mode again, the altitude number here in green whizzing around has got a definite blur to it. And also, look at the QNH flashing at us. It never fully disappears, it sort of blotches, and that's DLSS again being a bit weird. We are getting around 5 FPS more in DLSS quality. Now we're up in the air, by the way, so that's kind of nice, around 40 FPS. But given the pixel numbers that we're dealing with here in VR, we probably don't have the luxury of being too fussy about a bit of blurriness on the glass cockpit displays. So then, what about Nvidia Image Scaling? To enable it, we have to back out of the sim, go to the Pimax Play app. Pimax have recently updated their app to provide support for Nvidia Image Scaling. In non-VR, to enable Nvidia Image Scaling, you'd do it, say, through the Nvidia app or the Nvidia control panel, but that wouldn't work in VR, so Pimax have engineered it into their Pimax Play app, meaning that with the touch of a button, you can now have it in VR, which is really cool. Given, though, that this is a driver-level solution, this will apply to all games and not just Microsoft Flight Simulator. So again, keep that in mind. Pimax gives you 3 quality modes that you can choose from, or you can dial in your own. So we're going to start with the quality mode here, go back into the sim, and you can see on the ground we're getting a nice uplift of, around about 40 to 45 FPS, depending on where you look, which is an improvement over what we had with DLSS in quality mode, and sort of what we had with DLSS in performance mode. But I would say that Nvidia Image Scaling in quality mode looks better to me than DLSS did in performance mode. It's got a different look to DLSS, much sharper. You could almost say a bit on the prickly side, but the sharpness can be tuned to a point in the Pimax Play app. But crucially, it seems that just like we had in non-VR, in VR with Nvidia Image Scaling, our glass cockpits in the Airbus are free of that DLSS smeariness. And note how, now that we're in the air, we're getting nearly 50 FPS as we film the plane climbing out here. This is very impressive stuff. I tried the balanced and performance mode of Nvidia Image Scaling, and honestly, I wouldn't recommend them. All of a sudden, it looked very much like we were making a big compromise on the visuals. It looked kind of pixelated, almost. It was kind of obvious that there was something going on with an upscaler, and whereas on the quality mode, I think you get away with it. So for me, it will be quality mode only. I would really recommend, though, that you give Nvidia Image Scaling a try if you haven't already. It is Nvidia only, sadly. I appreciate the sim already has DLSS integrated within it, so you might say, well, why even bother with Nvidia Image Scaling? And for me, it comes down to 3 things. Number 1, we seem to get higher FPS versus DLSS. For example, we were getting similar frames per second out of Nvidia Image Scaling in quality mode compared to DLSS in performance mode. So that's quite a big deal. Number 2, Nvidia Image Scaling seems to avoid the glass cockpits of airliners being all smeary, which for me was a huge drawback of DLSS. And 3, as a driver level solution, you can apply it to all games. So if you're in and out of a few games, particularly in VR, and some have DLSS integrated and others don't, you could just flick one switch in the Pimax Play app and have this technology working across all of your games, kind of like a set it and forget it approach. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts in the comments if you've tried Nvidia Image Scaling, either in VR or non-VR. All of this stuff is very subjective. Some of you might not like the visual appearance of Nvidia Image Scaling versus DLSS, whereas I'd wager some of you would be really pleased to have an upscaler that can help with FPS without making your glass cockpit displays turn into a smeary mess. So do let me know. Anyway, I'll leave this one here. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and don't forget Pimax's flash sale on the 24th of August 2025. I'll leave all the details in the description. Until next time, though, you all look after yourselves, be good to each other, and as always, happy flying.